Today, we're jumping into a century that completely reshaped the world we live in. We're talking about Europe's 18th century revolution. But here's the thing, it wasn't just one single event, it was more like a chain reaction, a series of dominoes falling one after another, all starting with a change so fundamental it's almost hard to believe. Okay, let's get into it.
So it all kicks off with this number, 70 million. Between 1700 and 1800, Europe's population just exploded. It shot up from about 120 million to 190 million people. Now, just to put that into perspective, that's like adding the entire population of modern-day France to the continent in just 100 years. It's staggering.
So the big question is, where did all these people come from? I mean, this wasn't some story of mass immigration. No, this was an internal boom, something that had never happened on this scale before. And honestly, it became the central mystery of the 18th century.
To really get to the bottom of this mystery, we have to kind of throw out our first guess. Because the engine behind all this growth, it's not what you'd think. It wasn't about more life beginning, it was about less life ending.
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting. The common assumption, right, is that people must have just been having way more babies, but the data shows that's not it at all. Birth rates were pretty much stable and in some cases even went down a bit. The reality was actually much simpler and way more profound. People just stopped dying so young. The death rate plummeted.
So why? What changed? Well, it was like a perfect storm of good things happening all at once. For starters, the bubonic plague, which had terrorized Europe for centuries, just kind of vanished. And the climate got a little warmer, which was great for harvests. But look at this list. Do you see the pattern? The biggest factors all revolve around one thing: food. Having a stable, plentiful, and easier to transport food supply was the absolute game changer.
And this quote, wow, this just nails the scale of that change. A 50% food surplus. Think about that. This wasn't just scraping by anymore. This was a level of food security that was totally new. It was the fuel in the tank for the population boom. But how on earth did they pull that off?
And that leads us to our first and probably most important domino, the agricultural revolution. This was the engine that powered everything else. It was a series of simple yet totally brilliant innovations in farming that completely remade the European landscape.
You see, for centuries, farmers used what's called a fallow system. They'd leave a big chunk of their land empty every year just to let the soil recover. But then came this incredible innovation. Instead of leaving fields empty, they started planting nitrogen-rich crops like clover. The clover put nutrients back into the soil, and you could use it to feed your livestock. It was a total win-win. Suddenly, you get more grain, you get healthier animals, and you're using all of your land all of the time. Just a massive leap in efficiency.
Now, to really make these new farming techniques work on a huge scale, a big political change had to happen. This is where the Enclosure Acts come in. Governments, especially in England, started fencing off the old common lands, land that villages had shared for generations, to create these massive, privately owned, super efficient farms. Now, this was fantastic for producing more food, but it came at a huge, huge social cost.
And there it is, the first domino falls. We solved the food problem, but in doing so, we created a whole new human problem. Millions of small farmers and their families were pushed off the land they'd worked forever. They had more to eat, sure, but they had no home and no way to make a living. They had to go find a new future somewhere else.
Now here's a twist you might not see coming. This revolution in the fields didn't just change the landscape, it actually changed the family. With more food and fewer children dying in infancy, a quieter but just as important revolution started happening inside the home. People began to completely rethink the very idea of childhood.
Before this, kids were often just seen as miniature adults. They were expected to work and contribute to the family as soon as they possibly could. But now, this new idea started to spread, that childhood was a unique and precious stage of life, a time for learning and development, not just labor.
You had thinkers like Jean-Jacques Rousseau who were at the forefront of this. His book, Emile, was a massive bestseller, and it argued that a child's education should be natural and nurturing. And this wasn't just some abstract theory. It really changed how the upper and middle classes raised their children, pouring way more emotional energy and resources into their upbringing.
Okay, so let's get back to that huge new population of landless workers. What happened to them? Where did they go? Well, they started moving. This was the beginning of a mass migration from the countryside into the cities, which began to grow at a totally explosive and unregulated pace.
But life in these new urban centers was brutal.
I mean, truly awful. People were crammed into shoddy buildings with no plumbing, no sanitation. Garbage was just chucked into the streets. Diseases like tuberculosis spread like wildfire. And that tight-knit community you had in the village, it just evaporated in the big anonymous city.
So you end up with this intense paradox. On the one hand, the city offered a chance at a new life, a path to economic opportunity that never existed before. But at the same time, it created a public health and social crisis on a scale that nobody had ever seen or had any idea how to manage.
This new urban crisis demanded totally new ways of thinking. For the very first time, governments and institutions had to figure out how to manage the health, safety, and poverty of these huge, crowded, anonymous populations. And their early attempts were, well, they were a mix of forward-thinking science and pretty heavy-handed social control.
This slide breaks it down really nicely. You can see these two very different paths emerging. On one side, you have proactive, science-based ideas, like public health. And on the other, you have reactive measures, things that were all about policing the poor and controlling what was seen as social chaos.
A fantastic example of that proactive approach is Lady Mary Wortley Montagu. She was a brilliant aristocrat who saw doctors in the Ottoman Empire using inoculation to prevent smallpox. She brought the idea back to England and championed it. It was a pioneering scientific intervention that saved countless lives and really set the stage for modern medicine.
And then you have the other side of the coin, measures like the Vagrancy Act. As more poor people flooded into cities, the authorities responded with laws designed to control them. This wasn't really about solving the root causes of poverty, it was about managing the symptoms by cracking down on them, which was a huge step towards modern policing.
So, here's the bottom line. Whether it was through science or through policing, these were the birth pangs of the modern city. This is the moment when society first started to grapple with the huge challenges of mass urban life. Challenges that, let's be honest, are still very much with us today.
Which brings us to our final thought. This whole incredible domino effect of the 18th century solved humanity's oldest problem. How do we grow enough food so we don't starve? But in solving that, it created a brand new set of problems. How do we all live together in these dense, crowded, urban societies? It's the question they started asking back then, and if you look around, it's a question we are all still trying to answer.